Savings that felt safe at 35 often feel fragile at 65. You put money into a simple savings account or the same 401k plan for decades, and the plan looks fine, until medical bills, a market crash, or rising rent turns that safety into a scramble. Money doesn't sit still. Low interest rates, higher living costs, and medical bills chip away at savings. A 1% of savings rate can't keep up with 4-6% of healthcare inflation, so your nest egg shrinks in real buying power even if the nominal balance looks okay. Longevity changes the rules. Living longer plus bad timing, like a 20-30% of market drop early in retirement, means you sell into losses and accelerate depletion. Take $8.00 from a $200 portfolio after a big drop, and recovery is much harder than the headline math suggests. This matters because it's not about willpower, it's about gaps in the plan. Watch the next few minutes to see the common cracks people miss, the real costs that erode savings, and a few practical shifts that actually stretch a nest egg farther without turning your life upside down. The comfort trap: saving habits that stop adapting. People often keep the same saving routine even as their lives change. That steady auto deposit into a retirement account felt smart while paychecks grew, so people stick with it, assuming the plan will carry them through. But living costs and priorities shift with age, and the static habit stops matching real needs. A worker who funneled bonuses into a vacation fund may find the same habit meaningless when extended family responsibilities appear. The comfortable rhythm becomes a liability over time. Automatic systems make it feel like everything's handled. Payroll deductions, standing transfers, and one-click portfolio choices create a sense of security. Yet those systems are designed for a life cycle that isn't the same for everyone, and they rarely recalibrate when health needs, caregiving duties, or housing expenses change. One concrete example: a target date or life cycle fund will gradually shift toward bonds, which reduces volatility but also growth potential, and that trade-off matters more if someone delays recognizing longer retirement or higher medical costs. Small conveniences compound into large mismatches. Comfort breeds optimism about future needs. People assume the emergency cushion will cover surprises, and so they resist altering spending or savings patterns, which leads to underpreparedness for common later life expenses like home accessibility adaptations, ongoing prescription costs, or the need for paid caregiving. A homeowner who resists downsizing to avoid the hassle can end up spending more on maintenance and property taxes than anticipated, draining savings that were meant to last. The gap emerges because habits stayed the same while the context did not. Triggers reveal the gap, and they tend to be jarring. A market dip that reduces nest egg value, a health episode that creates unexpected bills, or the arrival of a dependent can expose how static saving habits fail. Some people respond by selling assets, others by shifting to investments that produce income or by buying insurance products, and a few reallocate more of their monthly cash flow toward care costs. Those are examples, not prescriptions. The pattern is clear. When saving practices stop adapting, comfort turns into constraint. Inflation and hidden costs shrinking the balance. The grocery cart suddenly costs more even though you bought the same items. Money sitting in a plain savings account can lose real value when prices climb faster than the interest it earns, and that erosion is gradual but relentless. A retiree who keeps most of their cash in low-yield accounts will see the same dollar buy less over time, so monthly budgets that once covered groceries and utilities begin to feel tight. Banks and credit unions often advertise safety and liquidity, but those benefits don't protect purchasing power. Over years, that mismatch between growth and rising prices eats away at the cushion people thought was secure. Small charges barely register at first. Monthly account maintenance fees, ATM surcharges, and penalties for early withdrawal quietly chip away at balances. Many mutual funds and ETFs carry expense ratios that reduce returns before they ever reach an investor's statements, and financial advisor fees can slice a steady portion off investment growth year after year. When compounding is working against you, returns lowered by fees while costs rise, the nest egg needs to be larger just to maintain the same lifestyle. People who compare bank statements a few years apart can find the headline balance deceptively optimistic once those regular deductions are accounted for. A sudden medical bill can rewrite a retirement plan. Out-of-pocket healthcare costs, deductibles, copays, and the need for in-home care or assisted living often come with price tags much larger than typical monthly expenses, and they're not always predictable. For example, a neighbor on a fixed pension may be fine until a chronic condition requires daily medication and extra home support, and those extra payments mean dipping into savings earlier than intended. Because these expenses tend to be front-loaded and recurring in later life, they accelerate withdrawals and reduce the principal that could otherwise earn returns to offset inflation. Taxes, utilities, and home repairs add up faster than people expect. Property tax reassessments, rising homeowners insurance, and the cost of replacing a roof or furnace are concrete hits to a balance that was supposed to last. Withdrawals taken during market downturns to cover these bills can lock in losses, leaving less capital to recover when markets rebound. Together with creeping price increases and the quiet drain of fees, these hidden costs create a compounding squeeze that traditional saving alone often cannot withstand. Health shocks and the erosion of predictable budgets. A single emergency can wreck a carefully balanced monthly plan. Sudden hospital stays, urgent surgeries, ambulance rides, and a stack of new prescriptions arrive without warning, and they tend to be expensive. Take a person who slips on ice and breaks a hip. There's the emergency transport, the surgery, the hospital bill, and then the follow-up physical therapy and home modifications. Those chained costs push people past planned withdrawals and into tapping emergency savings or taking on debt. Insurance helps in some ways and leaves gaps in others. Public and private plans often cover doctor visits and many hospital costs, but not everything. For example, Medicare commonly won't pay for long-term custodial care, routine dental work, or hearing aids, and most plans still have deductibles and coinsurance that must be paid out of pocket. A retired teacher living on a fixed pension can find that a joint replacement plus a few weeks of home health visits and a stair lift add up to far more than expected, forcing her to reallocate funds meant for day-to-day living. Chronic illnesses add another layer of unpredictability because they change over time. Conditions like diabetes, heart disease, or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease require ongoing medications, devices, and frequent checkups, and complications can suddenly escalate those needs. Someone managing diabetes might need new wound care supplies and more frequent specialist visits if a complication appears, which turns a steady monthly medication cost into a volatile stream of bills and appointments. Care needs ripple through the household and the budget. When a partner or parent needs help, a family member may cut back paid work hours to provide care, reducing household income just when expenses rise. Hiring a professional caregiver or moving into assisted living is an alternative, but that shifts the strain to cash flow and savings. The combined effect, higher outlays for care plus less predictable income, steadily erodes the reliability of what used to be a predictable budget. Work patterns, income shifts, and retirement timing. By the time people reach the later stretches of a career, steady paychecks often stop feeling steady. Many roles that once came with full-time status and benefits have fragmented into part-time, contract, or gig work, and that shift has a clear effect. Employer retirement plans and automatic payroll contributions disappear. A software developer who leaves salaried employment for a series of short contracts, for example, loses the employer match and the convenience of payroll deductions. That loss quietly drains the most reliable source of retirement saving income. Income shifts show up in blunt, practical ways. Bonuses, stock grants, and overtime that used to top up paychecks shrink or vanish when someone moves to a different role or accepts a low responsibility position to reduce stress or caregiving conflicts. Consider a middle manager who is pushed into a consulting role after a corporate reorg. The headline salary might look similar, but the bonus pool and equity vesting stop, and the consulting pay is irregular. That gap reduces monthly savings ability and often forces people to draw from emergency funds instead of topping up retirement accounts. Retirement timing gets pulled around by those work and income changes. Plans built on the idea of one last year of big pay and vesting fall apart if that final year never happens, and pension rules frequently require continuous service or a minimum tenure to trigger full benefits. A public school teacher who leaves a district before fully vesting in a pension, for instance, may see projected lifetime income drop sharply and face a choice between delaying retirement or accepting a much lower steady payout. The result is a domino effect. Earlier or forced retirement increases the number of years savings must cover while stopping the inflow of new contributions. Taken together, these forces make traditional saving strategies fragile. Someone in their 60s who shifts from a salaried job to freelancing often loses employer matches, faces gaps in health coverage, and confronts a regular cash flow that makes steady contributions impossible. Early withdrawals from retirement accounts become tempting and sometimes necessary, but those withdrawals reduce long-term principal and can trigger taxes or penalties that further thin resources. In short, changing work patterns and income volatility reshape when people can realistically retire and often undermine the mechanical savings plans they relied on earlier in life. Behavioral blind spots, risk, overconfidence, and small decisions. Most savers move into safer assets as work winds down. That instinct protects against a bad day in the market, but also cuts off the compounding that pays for long-tail expenses. So when a retiree sells stocks after a downturn, they can lock in losses, miss the recovery, and end up with less real spending power than expected. Confidence often outpaces knowledge. Someone who ran the household finances for decades can feel certain they'll figure out the rest, and that overconfidence shows up as skipping a second opinion, assuming healthcare will be modest, or trying to time a market dip. Choices that look reasonable when balances are fat but become risky when a sequence of poor returns or an unexpected bill appears. Tiny, repeated choices leak money. Automatic renewals for streaming services, keeping a second car for occasional trips, tapping savings for grandkids' weddings, or paying overlapping bank fees don't feel like decisions on their own, yet those small withdrawals reduce the principal that needs to grow. Inertia and status quo bias keep people enrolled in low-value products and paying recurring costs that quietly erode retirement readiness. These blind spots reinforce one another. Moving too conservatively early on reduces buffers, overconfidence keeps people from correcting course, and everyday leaks steadily shrink the base that must fund decades of living. So conventional saving that was good enough in midlife can fail once longevity, health costs, and sequence of returns risk tighten the margin for error. You probably noticed your nest egg isn't stretching like it used to. Because low interest rates, rising healthcare bills, longer lifespans, and bad market timing combine, the simple habit of saving, effective when you had steady income and short horizons, starts to fail as a loan strategy. It feels unfair after a lifetime of doing the right thing. If you relied on piling cash, a modest pension, or Social Security to carry you through, an unexpected surgery or a string of poor returns can force withdrawals at the worst possible time and erode your buying power. First VE seen that happen to people next door and in the inboxes first read. A retiree with 5 years of expenses in a savings account hit by 3% of annual inflation and a market dip had to sell investments at a loss to cover rehab costs, which turned a safe cushion into a costly mistake. You're not stuck with that outcome. If you'd like alternatives, think about converting parts of savings into predictable income, adding modest inflation protection, and planning for big one-off expenses. There are more videos coming that walk through specific mixes of annuities, part-time income strategies, and timing for healthcare spending. And if you'd like to follow those, subscribing and turning on notifications makes it easier to catch them.